the 8th of September 1820 in the town of Stirling, here in Broad Street, outside the toll booth, the radical weavers John Baird and Andrew Hardie were hanged and beheaded. In law they were guilty of high treason. In truth, victims of a desperate conspiracy to maintain established order, threatened from below by a rising middle class, but more crucially from the newly emergent labouring classes. It was a threat established order felt compelled to crush. Baird and Hardie felt the full weight of that brutal compulsion. The radical martyrs of 1820, as history has come to know them, were born into a society which was not only in the midst of a revolutionary social and economic upheaval, but was at the same time politically rotten and corrupt. Political power, the right to elect members to the House of Commons, lay, as it had done for centuries, in the hands of a small landowning elite and a group of self-elected and hence self-perpetuating body of town and borough councillors. In Scotland, in 1820, out of a population of 2 million, only 5,000 had the vote, and of these, a majority were in fact placemen of their landowning feudal superiors. A campaign for fundamental political reform began in 1790, when revolutionary changes in industry and in agriculture coincided with a phenomenal rise in population and urban growth. The American Revolutionary Wars and the Declaration of Independence in 1776, coupled with the shockwaves caused by the French Revolution in 1789, echoed and resounded throughout Britain, underlining her political backwardness. The clamour for male universal suffrage grew ever louder, especially so in the ranks of the weavers.
Freedom's Day, we say o'ercast, wave storms and clouds.
These and other crafts and tradesmen who, in founding the Trades Protection Societies, were the forefathers of modern trades unionism. In 1792, Tom Paine gave voice to this awakening with a political manifesto, The Rights of Man, said by one historian to be a foundation text of the working class movement. The first indicator of organised reasoned revolt were the Friends of the People, political societies founded in 1792 but crushed in 1794 following 3 major conventions held in Edinburgh. Thomas Muir and 4 other leaders of these assemblies were transported to Botany Bay following conviction on charges of sedition. The United Scotsmen, a secretive and insurrectionary Republican movement, maintained a shadowy existence, but by 1802 had withered. The will for political reform had faded due to savage repression and the onset and impact of the long Napoleonic Wars. All reform, radical or moderate, was regarded as unpatriotic, seditious, and ultimately treasonable. Discontent manifested itself in riot over food shortage, eviction, enclosure, and military conscription. In Trinent, in East Lothian, 12 died in an anti-militia riot. However, political demands remained muted. In 1815, the victory at Waterloo signalled the end of the long Napoleonic Wars. but with peace restored in Europe, war broke out at home. Soldiers home from the wars, migrants from Ireland and the Highlands, threw themselves on a labour market already stricken by the industrial and agricultural collapse of the wartime economy. Work was scarce, wages low, and trades protection threatened. The price of provisions were high, due to import duties on corn and statutory relief to alleviate such conditions non-existent. Charity was all that was on offer. In such circumstances, radical meetings and political societies again mushroomed. Politics and political change were once more on the agenda in an atmosphere charged with both resolution and despair. But in August 1819, events took on a more serious hue. In Manchester, at St. Peter's Field, 80,000 gathered to hear Henry Orator Hunt call for political reform. 11 were killed and hundreds more injured when the local yeomanry, sabres drawn, rode into the crowd in what has become known as the Peterloo Massacre, in parody of the victory at Waterloo. Peterloo was to be a dark omen for events in Scotland a year later, 1820.
Desperate demons ride the storm, howl terribly, and all that. Yet soon shall freedom's lovely form pray heaven descend, and all that. For all that, and all that, our dazzling light, and all that shall strike with consternation while their guilty heads and all that.
Whether the massacre at Peterloo occurred due to accident or design is unclear. Its bloody outcome, however, was welcomed by Lord Sidmouth, Home Secretary in the then Tory government. A message of congratulations was immediately dispatched to the Manchester magistrates, perhaps in the hope that the effect of their actions would serve to intimidate the widespread movement for political reform. In Scotland, however, the radical unions firmly stood their ground. The radical unions were political societies dominated by weavers and artisans, whose foremost demand was male universal suffrage, from which it was fondly supposed that by electing men of their own ilk, the obvious court and parliamentary corruption of civil society could be removed. This political cartoon, published in 1819, vividly illustrates a contemporary view of the common man and his predicament. On Saturday the 11th of September, a month after Peterloo, radical union contingents from all over the west of Scotland gathered in Paisley in their thousands in protest at what had occurred in Manchester. In the early evening, as they were leaving the town, the Lord Provost attempted to seize the leading banner. A riot ensued, which lasted an entire week. October 1819 saw the founding of the first radical newspaper, The Spirit of the Union. Demonstrations against Peterloo and for political reform were widely reported. At Broxbury, near Stirling, in the vicinity of the Boarstone where Bruce is said to have raised his standard at the Battle of Bannockburn, it was reported that on the 4th of December, 1,500 gathered for that purpose. Here on the battlements of Stirling Castle, cannon, primed and ready to fire, lay aimed in the direction of the radical protest. All, however, passed off peacefully. The Spirit of the Union published only 11 weekly editions. Gilbert MacLeod, the editor, was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 5 years transportation for sedition. He died shortly after reaching Botany Bay. His arrest followed the passing of the notorious 6 Acts. The gagging acts, as they were known, made seditious libel more easily prosecuted and transportation the sentence. In addition, radical newspapers such as the Spirit of the Union were suppressed through the imposition of stamp duty, and meetings or assemblies more effectually prevented. Arms training was forbidden, and justices of the peace could seize and detail all weaponry. Overburdened and bleeding, the common people were now to be silenced. With reform denied, and in the face of continuing economic hardship and distress, what the government feared most was that a serious and revolutionary challenge could be mounted against the existing order and constitution. In fact, government knew considerably more about radical activity than was appreciated at the time. Government spies, mainly radicals turned informants, infiltrated and penetrated leading radical committees, producing a chain of upward correspondence. January 1820 began with the death of the universally unpopular George III and the succession of the equally detested Prince Regent George IV. However, radical activity continued in Scotland. In February, a large meeting of radicals gathered in Ayr. The cap of liberty, a revolutionary symbol, was displayed, and calls made for people's liberty and civil rights. On the 21st of March, 1820, the government set in motion a train of events which would lead inexorably to the deaths of John Baird and Andrew Hardie. In Glasgow, 28 members of the Scottish Radical Committee were arrested whilst in secret session and held incommunicado. The next day, John King, a 29th member of the committee and government spy, informed rank-and-file radicals that a rising was imminent. On the 23rd of March, he announced himself as a representative of the provisional government to the Glasgow Radical Committee. A proclamation would be posted, he advised. Meantime, military drillings should be increased and pikes, along with other weaponry, made and procured in readiness. On that same day, Henry Hunt and other radical leaders were standing trial following the Peterloo massacre, and the government was 48 hours away from a general election victory in an unreformed parliament. Not without arousing some distrust and suspicion, John King and 3 other traitors to the radical cause allowed their conspiracy to unfurl. A proclamation was secretly printed at King's behest on Saturday the 1st of April, to be distributed and posted throughout the west of Scotland that night and the early hours of Sunday morning. Addressed to the inhabitants of Great Britain and Ireland, it gave justification for the necessity to take up arms for the redress of common grievances, and why this applied to rich and poor alike as despotism. Once begun, it would not confine itself only to the lower classes. Equality of rights, not of property, was the objective. But how was this objective to be achieved? The only guidance is in the following passage. In the present state of affairs, and during the continuation of so momentous a struggle, we earnestly request of all to desist from their labour from and after this day, the 1st of April, and attend wholly to the recovery of their rights, and consider it as the duty of every man not to recommence until he is in possession of those rights which distinguish the free man from the slave, that of giving consent to the laws by which he is to be governed. We therefore recommend to the proprietors of public works and all others to stop the one and shut up the other until order is restored, as we will be accountable for no damages which may be sustained, and which after this public intimation they can have no claim to. By order of the Committee of Organisation for forming a provisional government. Their motto, liberty or death. In Edinburgh, on that Sunday, Sir Thomas Bradford, military commander of Scotland, and his deputy, one Sir Richard Hussey Vivian, were preparing for an overnight ride to Glasgow with troop reinforcements. Monday the 3rd of April saw them deployed throughout the city, joining the regular troops and yeomanry divisions. The bridges over the Clyde were fortified with cannon. Troops were deployed on the outskirts of the city and helped to reinforce towns such as Paisley and Greenock. In Glasgow, all movable wealth was placed in the vaults of the Royal Bank of Scotland in Queen Street, in the process turning it into an armed fortress. And Samuel Hunter, fierce anti-radical and editor of the Glasgow Herald, commanded the yeomanry regiment of sharpshooters, which he himself had recently raised. As for the radicals, doubts as to the authenticity of the proclamation were muted by the massive response to the strike call. 60,000 struck work throughout West Central Scotland. A general strike. A strike, however, was not an insurrection. Crowds gathered in towns and villages, minor skirmishes, but no decisive military action. Military training and pike making was widespread. Arms and ammunition made and procured. According to inspired rumour, simultaneous risings were underway in England and Ireland. A provisional government based in Glasgow would give the signal as to the course of events in Scotland. John King and his accomplices were preparing just such a signal. On Monday the 3rd of April, the authorities proclaimed a 7 o'clock curfew, and on Tuesday the 4th, a £300 reward was offered to anyone providing information as to those guilty of this overt act of high treason by printing, publishing the said revolutionary and treasonable address under the said treasonable designation of the Committee of Organisation for forming a provisional government. On that same day, a group of Glasgow radicals were persuaded to march on the Cairn Ironworks, then the largest arms manufacturer in Europe, and seize the cannon made therein. 100 volunteers would meet with others from the localities. Of the 60 who mustered that evening, only 30 left the city. Among them, 28-year-old Andrew Hardie, a former army sergeant, weaver, and member of the Castle Street Union. He came upon the contingent by chance, but on hearing of their mission, insisted upon joining them. His enthusiasm, experience, and ability to lead soon cast him in the role of commander. As the radicals were leaving Glasgow, John King, alias Andrews, was arriving in Condorit, where he persuaded John Baird, a local weaver and, like Hardie, an ex-soldier, to join with the Glasgow radicals and command a Condorit contingent. Baird, Hardie, and 33 others all told left Condorit on the morning of Wednesday the 5th of April, unaware that at that moment Cairn was host to a troop of the 80th Regiment of Foot, and that the 10th Hussars would soon be arriving in Kilsyth. Having split into two parties, the radical army rendezvoused at Ironstone Pen, a road tunnel underneath the Forth and Clyde Canal near Bonnybridge. King, Andrews, advised them to wait upon Bonnymuir for a party of Camelin radicals. John King promptly disappeared, never to be seen again. Coming upon the moor, tired, apprehensive, and with the truth beginning to dawn, from some nearby trees, the radicals were confronted by a troop of the 10th Hussars and Kilsyth Yeomanry. The encounter was a violent though short-lived affair. The radicals were no match for well-trained, well-armed horsemen. 15 radicals, some seriously wounded, were arrested and taken to Stirling.
Down to the pens, way rags and chains, way tortures, gags, and all that. They'll tag their flight, they shun her sight, they dwell with night, and all that. For all that.
A few muskets, a couple of pistols and some pikes were recovered following the Battle of Bonnymuir. By July 1820, throughout the west of Scotland, 88 people were charged with high treason. Trials were fixed for Ayr, Dumbarton, Paisley, Glasgow and Stirling, where Andrew Hardie was first to be tried, under English law, with an English barrister playing a leading role in the prosecution. Francis Jeffrey, acting for Hardie, objected to this procedure in a Scottish court, but Lord Hope, the trial judge, overruled him. As recently as November 1819, Lord Hope had informed the government that all pretence is now thrown aside, even the flimsy pretence of radical reform. A complete revolution and plunder is avowedly their object, that it will come to blows, and that speedily. Hardie's trial lasted all day until 2 o'clock the following morning. After only 10 minutes, the jury returned with their verdict. On the charges of compassing and imagining the death of the king, and intending to depose the king from the style, honour, and kingly name of the imperial crown of the realm, the jury found him not guilty. On the charge of levying war, and compassing to levy war against the king in order to compel him to change his measures, he was declared guilty. Baird's trial followed the same course. Jeffreys advised the other defendants to change their pleas, as the evidence against them was materially the same. On the 4th of August, all 22 defendants connected with the Bonnymuir affair appeared in Stirling before Lord President Hope. He announced that the sentence of the law is that you and each of you will be taken to the place from whence you came, and that you be drawn on a hurdle to the place of execution, and there be hung by the neck until you are dead, and afterwards your head be severed from your body, and your body be divided into 4 quarters to be disposed of as his Majesty may direct. And may God, in his infinite goodness, have mercy on your souls.
Then shall the gag degraded man wallenly broods and all that our head ranks safe faint and one be cheered again for all that and all.
Only Baird and Hardie died that day, the 8th of September 1820.
Shall dawn to light when freedom bright breaks on its sight and all that.
James Wilson, a 64-year-old Straven weaver and a delegate to the Friends of the People Convention in 1793, had been executed in Glasgow the previous week, having been similarly entrapped by John King and his fellow spies. The rest of the Bonnymuir radicals, along with others throughout the country, were sentenced to periods of transportation. Hundreds fled the land, and many more were sentenced on lesser charges.
My name is Jamie Rainbow. In Glasgow I was born. My place and habitation I forced to leave with scorn. From my place and habitation I now must gang the wall, far frae the bonny hills and dales, O Caledon, It was early one morning, just by the break of day. We were wakened by the turnkey, who unto us did say, Arise, ye hapless convicts, arise ye in and all. This is the day you are to stray from Caledon.
The aftermath of the radical wars of 1820 dealt, as Peterloo had done in England, a mortal blow to the cause of political reform. Not until 1830 did the combined weight and action of working and middle-class opinion finally tip the balance towards political reform. The 1832 Reform Act, whilst enfranchising only the middle classes, finally swept away forever the oligarchic rule of landed wealth. And in these changed circumstances, the true nature of government involvement in the events of 1820 were now revealed. In 1832, Peter Mackenzie, a middle-class reformer, published an exposure of the spy system pursued in Glasgow during the years 1816 to 1820. In it, he named one Alexander Richmond as the leading spy master operating in Glasgow at that time. Indignant at such an accusation, Richmond sued Mackenzie in a London court in 1835. His libel action failed, thus exposing the hand of government in the events of 1820. As a result, the transportees of 1820 were immediately granted free pardons. There were no free pardons for Baird or Hardie. The radical martyr's last words on the gallows had been vindicated. Baird declared to the assembled crowds that what I have done and which has brought me here was for the cause of truth and justice. Hardie said simply, I die a martyr to the cause of truth and justice.
O freedom come, resume thy reign, though tyrants strive.